Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. 11 weeks ago, on the 7th of October, when Hamas attacked Israel, there were several military and intelligence failures, but what we don't know is how serious were they and at what sort of levels did they occur. That's one of the many issues I shall raise today, when I shall also talk about the implications and consequences of what Hamas has done, as well as the implications and consequences of Israel's dramatic response. Joining me from Israel is someone who perhaps is best placed to answer these questions. He is the former head of Mossad. He's also the former head of Israel's National Security Council, Efraim Halevy. Mr. Halevy, in the last 10, 11 weeks since October the 7th, it's become clear that there were multiple intelligence and military failures on October the 7th when Hamas attacked Israel. However, what we don't know is how serious were these failures and at what sort of levels did they occur? Could you start by giving me some idea of this?
Let me begin by an item from this morning. There's a quotation from the commander of the 98th Division in the IDF, who is leading the attack in the south of the Gaza Strip, which is the main focus at the moment of the war, because after the entry into the strip from the north, and afterwards concentrating on the center, in the last few days, they're fighting, the main focus of fighting is in the south, where the assumption is that the leadership of the Hamas is stationed at the moment. He said this morning that he believed it would take years in order to win this war. That is a quotation. And I think that this probably reflects the basic problem of all the assessments which we have had over the last few years in the relations with the Hamas. There's another item which I wish to mention in this context. And that is that about less than a week ago, a major tunnel was discovered in the north of the Gaza Strip, which is very close to the point where the Gazans used to move into Israel for working in Israel. Many, many thousands of Gazans, probably also Hamas people, were using this entry in order to seek employment in Israel. And there were times when we had 10,000, maybe more, of workers who used to enter Israel. But a few days ago, there was a revelation that a new tunnel was discovered. A tunnel with a width and a height which is unprecedented. It's like a major highway, which can take in trucks, large trucks, and many other devices, including tanks and others, into this tunnel. it was a very modern tunnel. And the person who was in charge of this operation was the brother of Sinwar, who is an engineer, and who was the man who almost completed this project before we were able to discover it a few days ago. I'm saying this because the surprises that we are meeting in this war and the surprises in relation to previous assessments are very, very probably one of the hallmarks of the situation that we have been competing with. Now, you asked me about the intelligence failure. Intelligence failure was a result of the fact that for very many, many years, we were accustomed to the assumption that we were going to have rounds of confrontation with the Hamas of a certain type, and we had several confrontations with them over the years after we left the Strip in 2005. But we did not assume, and we did not have information, clear information, about the extent to which they were able to find alternatives to the tunnels that they had dug under the earth opposite the south of the country, and that they had moved to a different system, a different way in which they were going to attack us. And they attacked us in a way which we did not expect. And notwithstanding the fact that we had observation posts along the southern strip of Israel, opposite the Gaza Strip, and although we had especially girl soldiers there who were watching and were reporting, and they were reporting for months before the event happened, but they were probably ignored, or in the worst cases, some of the senior commanders were telling them that if they would continue to issuing these reports, they were in danger of being court-martialed. I'm saying this because I think it was beyond imagination and beyond knowledge, and also beyond intelligence, human intelligence, I would say, which was a very difficult area in which the expertise was in the hands of the security service, because the security service is in charge of the security inside Israel, and therefore the decision was taken after the Six-Day War that they would also be in charge of all the intelligence operations which are in the other areas of former Palestine. And the fact of the matter is that the security service has been very successful in many, many fields. It had very many successes, but in this case, I think they were unfortunately short of good sources, human sources, and others. The second problem, failure of the intelligence, was that for many, many years, as you probably know, there has been a more and more emphasis on not human intelligence, but technical intelligence, signal intelligence, in which Israel has reached very, very considerable success. And therefore, the human intelligence aspect of connection in the Gaza Strip was to some extent looked upon as a more junior element in the overall collection of intelligence. Going beyond that, as you probably know, we were involved in a major domestic crisis for many, many months before this event happened. There were major demonstrations in the street of Israel against the government's policy to try and bring about a judicial reform in the country, which many people thought would be a step in the wrong direction, and creating a different balance between the various elements in government, and to a large extent demoting the status of the Supreme Court of Israel. And these major demonstrations, which took part in many cities in Israel, including our major city, which is Tel Aviv. We had sometimes 200,000 people, even more, demonstrating week in, week out. Also major demonstrations in Jerusalem and all the major cities in Israel. And the focus was on our domestic crisis, with all that entails. There were reports, there were documents which were written about a growing threat from the Hamas and so forth. I will not say they were totally ignored, but the weight of these warnings was not appreciated. And it so happens that shall we say, a historical date that this happened almost to the day when we had a war in 1973, 50 years ago, and where again we had an intelligence failure, which was a key element in the war of 1973, in which ultimately we lost in dead the number of dead soldiers, over 2,300 dead soldiers during the war, which lasted, by the way, 3.5 weeks, almost 3.5 to 4 weeks.
Can I ask you a couple of quick follow-up questions on that very momentous answer you've just given me? In the very early days of this war, the Prime Minister late at night, Prime Minister Netanyahu, put out a tweet which he then hastily retracted and deleted, where he claimed that there was no information in the Prime Minister's office available to him, advance warning of any intention that Hamas may have had. I take it what you've said disproves that tweet. He has retracted it, I know, but the claim in that tweet that he was not advance warned is untrue.
Well, there have been several senior officers who have spoken of documents that have been written in military intelligence, which were passed on to the Prime Minister's office. There is a military secretary to the Prime Minister who is the channel for these documents, and is the channel of contact between the Prime Minister and the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces. And I don't want to pass judgment on this, because there's no doubt whatsoever that ultimately, when we will have to set up an inquiry commission, which will have to be a judicial inquiry commission, when the war is over, all these issues will be subject of the inquiry of the commission, which traditionally is led by the president of the Supreme Court.
Absolutely, but as you began by saying, there were several senior military officers who had sent reports to the Prime Minister's office. Now, you began your answer by saying that this morning, the commander of the 98th Division was quoted as saying that this war could take years. You also spoke about this new tunnel that's been discovered, and I believe from reports that I've read, it's wide enough and large enough to even take a small vehicle or a small car. Both those facts suggest that Hamas was extremely militarily well prepared, and secondly, that they had a fair amount of good expertise to dig fairly substantial tunnels that can take cars. Would I be right in coming to both those conclusions?
Yes. The simple answer is yes. I think that there has been a very, very serious misestimation intelligence-wise, of the capabilities of the Hamas. I think, though, they are now suffering very, very serious losses. I think the number of manpower or warriors killed probably will be in the excess of over to 10,000. And if that is the case, it would mean that a third of their fighting force has been neutralized. Probably in the next few weeks, the number will rise. Israel is now concentrating its attacks on the south of the country, where the assumption is that the leadership of the Hamas is underground. And if there is a ceasefire of one kind or another, if hostilities are either terminated, which I doubt in entirety this would be, but if there's going to be a lull in the fighting, it will be without the main aim of this operation having been succeeded.
You also, Mr. Halevy, spoke in the beginning of that first answer about Israeli women soldiers in observation posts who were actually observing Hamas preparations. They were apparently, according to other newspaper reports I've read, observing drills being carried out by Hamas in preparation for the attack. They reported these, but in some instances, they were even threatened with court-martial if they continued to report such information. That, to me, sounds not just like irresponsibility, but something more serious like dereliction. Dereliction on the part of the seniors who failed to realize what they were being told.
Well, as I said, I agree with you, but I think it would be unfair to pass judgment on this and other key aspects of the failure before the judicial inquiry has pronounced its findings. You must understand that one of the immediate aspects of what has happened was that all the major figures in the establishment, not the political establishment, but the establishment of the military and the intelligence services, all of them who are involved in this have made statements taking full responsibility for this intelligence failure. That is, the head of the Israel Security Service, the head of the Military Intelligence Service, and others. Not the head of the Mossad, because the Mossad was not in the list of EEIs of the Mossad to deal with the Gaza Strip. Traditionally, this has been the area in which the security service acted as a shall we say, an adjunct to their activities inside Israel, because normally in countries like India and otherwise, in the United States and Europe, elsewhere, Russia, in China, you have a division of responsibility, and everything which is external is in external services. Here, in this case, since the area is so small, since there's so many contacts between what is happening in the south of Israel and what is happening in Gaza, which was originally part of Palestine, this has been in the orbit of the security service.
Absolutely. Now, as you point out, and as I've read in newspapers, the head of Shin Bet has accepted responsibility and blame. The head of the military intelligence has accepted responsibility and blame. The only person, it seems, who hasn't accepted any measure of responsibility and has attempted in his earlier tweets to, in fact, push responsibility to others seems to be Prime Minister Netanyahu. Is that impression that is fairly widespread correct?
That is true.
Does that rankle?
That is true. He says, he is saying that when the time comes, everybody will have to answer many questions, difficult questions, and he'll also be one of the persons who will have to answer difficult questions. But he has not followed suit with the others, and he has not admitted responsibility for anything until this point. By the way, in the last few days, there has been a report on Israeli television of a statement which was made by Netanyahu, and it is shown on the screens, and it was in 2017, in which he was describing the threat which Israel is facing opposite the Hamas and so forth. And in many, many of the aspects which actually came about in the war, they were mentioned by Netanyahu as the threats that Israel was facing. In other words, when it comes to the question, did he know, and was he aware, and did he speak publicly about the threats from the south and the dangers of the war, many of the aspects of the fighting capabilities of the Hamas and their intentions were mentioned in this appearance on television, which was found in the archives of the broadcasting intelligence and broadcasting television services here, and has been shown on television for the last 3 or 4 days.
That's very important what you said, Mr. Halevy. Going back to the archives, it's quite clear the Prime Minister knew, the Prime Minister was informed, but the Prime Minister either forgot or certainly failed to act. He had the knowledge somewhere in the background many years ago, but failed to use it when it was needed. Now, in your earlier answer, you also referred to the turmoil that politically Israel went through for weeks, if not for months, prior to October the 7th. As you said, tens of thousands, in some instances, 200,000 people were protesting on the streets against the Prime Minister's proposed judicial reforms. To what extent did that turmoil play to Hamas's advantage? And equally, to what extent did it weaken the Israeli state, just when the state needed to be strong?
Well, let me say there are two angles in which this subject needs to be treated. No doubt, the continuous turmoil, domestic turmoil in Israel was a serious one, because it also affected the armed forces. There were cases in which many of the Israeli pilots declared that they would stop their regular training, which they had to take on aircraft in order to be ready for any eventuality. There were other forces as well, the Navy and others, who also joined this. In other words, it could be said that because there were demonstrations on the domestic issues, and because these also affected the armed forces, that this would affect the capability of the IDF once a war broke out the way it was. In practice, this is not what happened, because the moment there was an attack in the south, within hours, the entire military setup of Israel swung into being. Reserve forces were recruited in hours, and all the pilots turned up for duty. And the Israeli Air Force has been performing perfectly from the beginning of the battle. And there is unanimity among the officers that this is the threat which we were facing and still facing was a very, very serious threat, one of the most serious we've had since our War of Independence. And therefore, I think this is something which has to be mentioned. I will say one other thing, with your permission. I mentioned the number of casualties in the Yom Kippur War. The Yom Kippur War did not last 2 months. It was less, and we had over 2,000 dead fighting men in the military. Today, the number of people killed is something in the nature between over 100, including, by the way, the son of a former chief of staff, General Eisenkot, who has been, he's now a member of parliament, and he has been recruited to be a member of the small cabinet which the prime minister set up, which is actually the ultimate political, shall we say, the political level, which is running this war.
I accept the point you make, Mr. Halevy, that once the war with Hamas started, the Israeli Defense Forces responded with alacrity, with swiftness, with strength, and have certainly made their country very proud with the way they've responded. But is it also not true that in the days or weeks just before the Hamas strike, a whole brigade was moved from the Gaza area to the West Bank? That brigade would have been necessary in Gaza on the 7th of October, but just days or weeks before, it was moved to the West Bank because the West Bank was the new focus of attention.
Yes, that's true. The unit which was in the south was moved to the West Bank, where there's been an uprising of Palestinians against the Israeli activities in the West Bank. And it's true that there was a decision to move that unit. And it's also true that it took a too long a time to get the unit back where it should have been originally. That's true. But that's also one aspect of the problem, because it also shows that one of the things which will await us, and it will not be a matter in which we could wait too long, would have to be how to, in the eyes of the government of Israel, how to look to the future and how to think about the future in the eventuality if the Hamas loses control of the Gaza Strip. What do we do? I mean, what happens?
I'll come to that in a moment's time. But first, before we talk about what Israel will do if Hamas loses control of the Gaza Strip, let me ask you an earlier question. You're a former head of Mossad. You're a former head of the Israeli National Security Council. What do you believe was Hamas's intention behind the October 7 attack? Hamas would have definitely known that there is no way they could bring Israel down to its knees. So what do you think was their aim or their purpose behind this attack on the 7th?
I don't know. All I can say is that I believe that they thought that they would deal us a very, very painful and heavy blow. I was surprised myself, I would say, by the fact that they actually took this action, because in the recent years, Israel, as I said, was the area where they used to find much of their employment. Many, many, many people found daily employment in Israel, moving through the tip of the Gaza Strip in the north into Israel. Not only that, there were many cases in which the Israeli medical system opened its gates to serious medical problems in the Gaza Strip. There were many babies and children, young children, who were treated in the Tel HaShomer hospital, which is the leading hospital in Israel. The atmosphere was not an atmosphere of complete enmity. On the contrary. And Israel also saw it and allowed a monthly flow of money from Qatar into the Gaza Strip, and Israel facilitated this as well. And so the people in the Strip had a constant flow of money into the Strip, which Israel was glad to allow. And secondly, in terms of the economy and the well-being and the level of life in the Gaza Strip, the daily food that they ate and so forth, they had many of them, a large number of them, I'd say the majority, had the means to maintain their food supplies and water supplies and everything else you can imagine.
As you say, Israel was completely taken by surprise when Hamas attacked on October the 7th. The atmosphere, the relationship that was prevailing before that date did not suggest anything like this would happen, nor did the economic relationship between the Strip and Israel suggest this was happening. But let me ask, were you surprised by the capacity and capability that Hamas had put together and was able to launch on day one?
I say again, I don't feel myself to be competent to evaluate the capability of Hamas on day one. When I was head of Mossad, I was not involved in this kind of assessment of the Gaza Strip, as I said before, and I'm not more knowledgeable than the average Israeli. So what I'm going to say now is not the words of a major expert on Gaza in this matter. But what I will say is this: I think of all the things that have surprised me in this assault we had on the 7th of October, beyond the fact that they decided to carry out this attack, was the intensity of their fighting and the extreme cruelty that they exhibited on the day of the assault in killing people, raping ladies, taking bodies and pulling them apart, up to the point that even to this day, we have many body parts which have not yet been identified and cannot be identified and brought to burial. The cruelty and the inhumanity of their performance, of their behavior on that particular day was something which I've not seen by anybody ever. I would even say it is not only equal to the way the Germans put to death 6 million Jews in gas chambers. Here, there's simply a question of the total violation of humanity in all its aspects. I don't think I can mention or I can remind you or the listeners of any other war in the history of this earth on which we are all living, in which the intensity and the inhumanity reached the degree that it was on that particular day.
Tell me, Hamas must have known, Mr. Halevy, that Israel's response would be devastating, and that in the process, thousands of innocent civilians, Palestinians, would be killed. But do you think they failed to realize just how devastating it turned out to be? Did they underestimate Israel's response? Earlier, you said that there was a very, very serious misestimation by intelligence of Hamas's capability. Now, in return, did Hamas underestimate the enormous, devastating response that they would get from Israel? Or were they expecting that up to 20,000 could be killed and up to 50,000 could be injured? And were they willing and prepared for that?
I don't think they were willing, and I don't think they were prepared. But I will tell you, the Hamas was not just a movement which had fighters and warriors. Many of the key figures in the establishment, the civilian establishment in Gaza, were people who were members of the Hamas, including some of the directors of the hospitals, and many of the medical staff. They were not just people who are working for the civilian government, so to speak. They were members, and they identified with the aims of Hamas. But I'll say also something else. I think the Hamas has undergone a very intense process of extremism. There were times when the Hamas movement did not, from the outset, think in terms of destruction of the state of Israel, as per se, because they didn't have the capability, and I'm talking about the time when it was when the entire area, including the Gaza Strip, was in Israeli hands. The fact of the matter is that Israel retreated, if you can call it, from the Gaza Strip originally in 2005, and it was not an agreement. It was a one-sided decision. It was a decision taken by Prime Minister Sharon, in which he decided that Israel would leave the Gaza Strip. We didn't leave the Gaza Strip by having an agreement with the Palestinians. We simply said on one particular day that we have decided to leave the Gaza Strip. And that was, amongst other things, because of the casualties which we were suffering from with the settlers there. And we forcibly evacuated several thousands of settlers from the Gaza Strip and brought them to Israel. Many of them most of them are people who were very religious, Jewish religious people, and believed that the entire area of Palestine should belong to the Jewish people. And the fact of the matter is, this unilateral withdrawal from the Gaza Strip probably brought into the eyes of the Hamas the idea that if they had the capability, then why not use it? And at one time, there was a decision to have a general election in the Palestinian Authority.
That's
in
right.
2007.
2006, 2007, which Hamas
Yes.
won, as a result of which,
This was the only free election that the Palestinian public had the opportunity to vote. And contrary to all the estimates of everybody in Israel, including the security service, everybody else, they got a majority.
And Hanife became the prime minister, both of Palestine Authority as well as of the Gaza Strip, and all of that fell apart. But tell me this, today, after October 7, Israel's determination, Israel's target is to obliterate Hamas. That's the language that Prime Minister Netanyahu, that your Defense Minister, Mr. Gallant, have both used. And no doubt, the leadership and the organization of Hamas can be destroyed. But as a man who spent his life in intelligence, can the ideology of Hamas be destroyed? Or is there a danger that in the attempt to do so, you could end up building more support for Hamas, not just in Gaza, but perhaps also increasingly in the West Bank. Is that the risk you're running? In trying to demolish Hamas, you might end up building up and reinforcing its ideology.
You have correctly described what the policy that the Prime Minister announced on the first day of the war, and that was the ultimate annihilation of Hamas on the globe. Even if it would take years afterwards to pursue Hamas people, operatives, and so on, wherever they are on the globe. And this was a very unfortunate statement, I think, because I personally do not think that we are in a position to obtain this ultimate result. I don't know whether the Prime Minister still thinks in these terms. If he does, then he's very much mistaken. But he's not. That's not the only mistake he has committed in recent years, in my personal opinion.
You've been very upfront and honest, Mr. Halevy, in saying that you do not believe Israel's in a position to annihilate Hamas. Then let me ask you a corollary question. In the process of trying to do so, is there a danger that you could end up creating such levels of grievance, hurt, pain, and a desire for revenge amongst the Palestinians? Tens, maybe tens of thousands of them will want their revenge one day, that you could end up with a bigger problem down the road. You may be tackling a problem today, but creating a monstrous problem for the future.
I don't want to speculate. What you are saying now is speculation. I don't want to enter the area of speculation. But I'd like to say one other thing, which I have said before, and also I gave expression to my view in an article I published at the end of the first week of the war in the London Times. What Israel announced was that we were going to enter what you call a maneuver. A maneuver. Now, maneuver is not just a word in the dictionary. Maneuver is a term which is associated with the aim, an aim in war, which is obtained by maneuver. What is an aim which a maneuver is supposed to obtain? And the definition is that a maneuver is a term which describes a military action which is designed to obtain the following result: that the force that you are fighting is defeated, and moreover, they lose the desire to fight. And I believe that, I did not believe then, that to say that we should do exactly that, what we call a territorial maneuver, and even if we thought of it, we should announce it. In other words, what we have done is not only that the Prime Minister said that this is the aim of the government of Israel, but one should assume that what the IDF offered in terms of what they could do is to have a maneuver. We have never done this before. We have never done this before. The only time we did something which came near to that was in the Yom Kippur War, when ultimately we were confronting the Egyptian forces and the and the Syrian forces who attacked us simultaneously from both sides, when that happened, we were in a position of dictating to the Egyptians the necessity to negotiate directly with us in order to settle the problem. And that brought the ultimate result of the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. This is not the situation which I believe we're in today.
I'm reading between the lines of what you said, but I'll put it to you to ask you if I'm correct. You said that it was wrong and unfortunate of the Prime Minister to declare publicly that his intention was to annihilate Hamas. You said, or at least you suggested, you didn't think you could reduce Hamas to a position where they would give up the desire to fight altogether. In other words, Israel has set itself an unachievable goal.
That is my view, yes.
What then, in your view, is the best way of dealing with Hamas? You have held some of the most important positions in Israeli intelligence. You've not just been head of Mossad, but more importantly, you've been head of the Israeli National Security Council. You must have thought of this many, many times. What is the best way of handling Hamas?
I think the question, of course, is there any possibility, or is there any usefulness in negotiating with Hamas? I, in the past, believed that my view had been many times that ultimately we should talk to Hamas, not only fight Hamas. All I can say is on that for a fact, that I think there was a moment in time, and I don't, for certain reasons that I cannot, and I don't have the approval to say more than this in terms of the sources and things like that. I think there was a time when the Hamas senior figures said that they were willing to have what we call a hudna, which is a term in Islamic terms, which is a permanent ceasefire, and in this hudna, the temporary borders of the Palestinian state would be the 1967 border system, which was there on the spot until then.
You're talking, aren't you, Mr.
The borders
Halevy?
of 67 were determined by the United States and the United Nations Security Council in 1967, after the Six-Day War. And to say that the 1967 borders, which by the end of the war, or the end of the 1948 war, was relived. We relived the 1967 borders in that time. Maybe it would be possible to talk to them. I don't think that the moment, due to what has happened, a negotiation between us and Hamas is a practical proposal to make.
Mr. Halevy, when you say, and I'm quoting your words, I think from memory, but I think I'm doing it accurately, when you say there was a time when senior Hamas figures were willing for a hudna, a sort of ceasefire, you're referring to what some people call the change in Hamas attitude, maybe the change in the Hamas charter that happened around 2017. And you're also suggesting by implication that that might have been a moment that Israel lost.
Look, you remember maybe our audience this morning doesn't remember every element or every event which happened. But in 1997, the Israeli Mossad, at the under the direction of Prime Minister Netanyahu, who had been Prime Minister for about a year, more than a year, well over a year, decided to carry out an assassination attempt against a man called Khaled Mashal, who was a leader in the Hamas. Okay. And the operation was planned to take place on a very, very busy street in the center of Amman. And the idea was to smear him with a certain type of poison, which would ultimately bring him to a better world. Well, what happened was that the operation failed, that the two of the
did not King Hussein implore Netanyahu to send the antidote to save Mashal's life?
Yeah, no, he implored it, but the decision to give the antidote was taken immediately, regardless of the request of King Hussein. And then Hussein did not request that; it was done immediately, and he was told that this was given and so forth. I was then Israel ambassador to the European Union, and due to the fact that I was the personal envoy of Prime Minister Rabin in the secret negotiations on the peace treaty, the Prime Minister Netanyahu called me in hastily to deal with dealing with the crisis which arose as a result of this. And I don't want to go into all the details of those days and all the discussions which took place, etc. But practically, when I reached the palace, originally Hussein asked me not to be involved in this because of the relationship I had with him. But after that, he understood. When I said that I was coming with an offer that he could not refuse. And the offer was to release the founder of Hamas, Sheikh Yassin, to King Hussein. He was then in an Israeli jail. And I thought this would be a very dramatic event which could be useful in many, many ways. And originally, the Prime Minister Netanyahu, to whom I communicated by phone, immediately rejected it and said, "That's impossible, think of something else." But the following day, he said, "Yes, go ahead." And when I saw Hussein, Hussein said to me, "I don't understand why it is that this operation was carried out, because days before, I had sent a document through the Mossad in which there was a proposal of the Hamas to have a 30-year hudna, a 30-year ceasefire. And I understand that what you did to try and assassinate Khaled Mashal was in retaliation, shall we say, a symbolic retaliation to the offer of a hudna. When in actual fact, and that is true, the document which the king had given to a senior Mossad official with whom he was in contact, the document was left on the desk of the head of the Mossad, the previous head of the Mossad, and Netanyahu didn't know about it at all.
You mean it was never given to Netanyahu?
It was never given to Netanyahu, no. But here again, you see, you have to be creative in situations like this, and you have to think out of the box, I think is the word used. You have to use your imagination. At the same time, by the way, when I was with the king, and I
Carry
hello,
on speaking,
hello.
sir. Our light at this end has failed, but we can hear you. Please carry on speaking, sir.
I say because I don't see you. Okay, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly. Please carry on, sir. Our lights will come back
Okay.
on.
So what happened was that after here we are again. But what happened was that after speaking to King Hussein and this all this happened, I said to the king, I would be grateful if this, as I'm talking to you, if you would make an act or take an act of royal compassion. And he said to me, what is royal compassion? And I answered, I don't know what royal compassion is because I'm not royalty, but you're royalty, and therefore you know what royal compassion is. And the result was that he allowed me to take the people who were in the embassy, and which was being surrounded by the military, and take them back to Israel, regardless of what happened to the others who had been captured, which was a different story.
And he agreed?
Pardon?
And he agreed?
And he agreed. He let me take four people back with me, and the two remained there as prisoners for further negotiation. But I also determined that they were alive. They'd not been killed as a result of this.
Mr. Halevy, you've sketched out in delightful detail for the aficionados moments in history when perhaps if they had been taken at the flood, to quote Shakespeare, they could have led to fortune, but they didn't. These were moments that were missed, and that, I imagine, is something that will be part of the legacy that Mr. Netanyahu will have to face up to. Clearly, he has a lot of responsibility to bear for moments when, in fact, some sort of solution with Hamas could have been reached, but wasn't. But let me bring you instead to the situation you face today, particularly vis-a-vis your allies and public opinion, because that is something that, as a former head of Mossad and as a former head of the Israeli National Security Council, will matter to you and concern you. Increasingly, there is a perception in the global south, and with every passing day, there is a perception in the West, particularly amongst the young people of the West, that Israel is determined to obliterate Hamas no matter what the toll in civilian Palestinian lives. In other words, the end justifies the means, no matter how horrific the means. And this is turning people internationally against Israel. You've seen the demonstrations in Europe, in Washington, in New York, in London, where 300,000 people on Saturdays have come out on the streets. Does it worry you that the younger generation in your closest allies in the West is now turning against Israel and its policies? Does that concern you?
Yes, it does. It concerns me. But I think that we have to look at our priorities. And now our number one priority, which is a very, very painful one, is how to get back our hostages, the hostages who are now in prison. And therefore, I think at this moment in time, to engage in the larger picture, maybe it should be done in closed rooms in Israel in order to start thinking of the future. What will be the future of the Gaza Strip? What will happen if war ends? If there's a ceasefire tomorrow morning, does Hamas remain there as the sovereign power in the Gaza Strip? If not, who will take over the Gaza Strip? I'm sure that Israel should not take over the Gaza Strip and take responsibility for the lives and daily lives of over 2 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. I don't know if people are looking at all these things. I'm not privy to this. Maybe they are in the National Security Council or elsewhere. That I do not know. But what I do know is now that we are now faced with the very serious problem of how to get back the 139 hostages which the Hamas are holding. And
forgive me for
this is something which concentrates my mind at the moment, and it's difficult for me after having talked to you, and I think on many issues I've said things beyond the box, to suddenly come back to this issue at the moment.
But I want to actually explore that issue because I think it is a fundamental concern for your countrymen, and it's a matter that is now bringing people out in public protest on the streets of Tel Aviv. You're aware of that more than I am. I believe there are still some 129 Israeli hostages in Hamas custody. Days before we began this interview, even hours before we began this interview, there was some talk, some hope that there might be a pause, that there might be an exchange of hostages. Hamas seems to have quashed that. Hamas is now saying that their position is that there will be no exchange of hostages unless Israel agrees to a general permanent ceasefire. Now, let me put this to you. In the past, Israel has agreed to hugely disproportionate exchanges of Palestinian prisoners for Israeli hostages. In 2011, you released 1,027 Palestinian prisoners for one single soldier, Gilad Shalit. In 1985, you released 1,150 prisoners for 3 Israeli soldiers taken hostage in Lebanon. This time round, the Netanyahu government, possibly under pressure from its right-wing allies, refuses to accept a similar exchange. A, how do you view that hardline attitude? And B, are you worried that the hostages could become, and I'm using the word deliberately, collateral damage?
I agree with what you say. I think that as I say, the release of the 139 hostages is a very, very acute issue, probably the number one immediately acute issue that this government is facing. I think this matter, by the way, is being handled at a very high level. It so happens that the head of the Mossad is the Israeli counterpart for all this negotiation. But the others are very senior people. It's the Prime Minister of Qatar and United States officials, including in a moment the head of the CIA. And I think that, as I say, at this moment, this point in time, this is a matter which is on which the Israelis are focused, parallel to the fighting which is still going on in Gaza. Anything else now which relates to the broader canvas which you have described are issues which will have to be approached. I am not in a position to offer now a string of proposals of how to handle the future of the Gaza Strip, or how to deal with Israel's public opinion polls in various countries in the world. I think this is now the focus of it all. And I believe that ultimately we will have to approach all the issues that you have mentioned, but they are valid issues, they're important issues, but I think people cannot concentrate their minds on that. Yesterday, the day before yesterday, I met the lady who is one of the leaders of the families of the hostages. She came to visit me here in my residence, in my home, in my apartment, and we had a long talk about what can do, what can't be done, and so forth. And this is a matter which is very much in the front line of Israel public opinion.
Let me ask you something else. You began right at the start of this interview by pointing out that this morning the commander of the 98th Division had said that the war could take years. Now, we've already had President Biden saying Israel is guilty of indiscriminate killing. He said that a few days ago. Earlier, on Indian soil, when he was present, Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, said far too many Palestinians have already been killed. But if this war is going to continue for years, if more Palestinian civilians will be killed, if more will be injured, are you worried that pretty soon, not just down the road, but pretty soon, your closest ally, the only country that matters to Israel, America, could turn around and say, enough is enough, stop. You cannot carry on killing innocent civilian Palestinians because that goal of obliterating Hamas, as you yourself accepted, is unattainable. Are you worried that America will put such pressure that the war will have to stop or change dramatically in character?
I think that Israel was fortunate, very, very fortunate, in that Providence had it that when this event happened, the President of the United States was Joe Biden. And I think that Israel has should be not only grateful to him and to his senior officials in government for the way they have handled the, shall we say, the Israeli fire, how they have dealt with the Prime Minister and with the others of the senior figures in government. And therefore, I'm sure that the aspects that you have mentioned are very much uppermost in the minds of many of the ministers in the inner cabinet, which is now running the war. And I would expect that those who have joined the cabinet at the request of the Prime Minister from the opposition at their meetings of the inner cabinet, which is the really the focus of which is running the war, that the people there, like General Gantz, who's the head of the leading opposition party, according to the polls, he's not the head of the opposition. In fact, in Parliament, somebody else, the former Prime Minister Lapid. But I'm hopeful that these aspects that you are mentioning will be very uppermost in the minds of those who are sitting at these meetings in order to determine what to do, because there is a danger. There is a danger, a double danger here. One is that if we don't do certain things, that we will be to some extent endangering the future and the lives of the hostages that are there. And the last few days, there have been several cases in which information has come through that hostages have died in the hands of the Hamas.
Yes, while carrying white flags. While carrying white flags, Israeli soldiers felt threatened and accidentally killed their own, even though they were carrying white flags.
Well, that's true. That was a major mistake. It was a tragedy, and not only for those who died, but also for those who shot at them. I can assure you. And I think that that was a very, very painful event, which had repercussions. But that's not it's not a major event for what we have to deal with now. What we have to deal with now is to find a way in which we, on the one hand, are able to do the best we can as long as we can to fight the war, and we have to begin to find a strategy of how we reach a ceasefire of one kind or another without damaging some of our main interests.
Two
That is the problem.
questions, Mr. Halevy, because I've taken a lot of your time and I'm deeply grateful for the fullness with which you've spoken to me and for the length of time for which you've given me. But two last questions. And really, they're about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his policy towards the Palestinians during the 16 years he's been Prime Minister of your country. He's been determined to discredit Fatah and the Palestine Authority, whilst either building up or in some other way maintaining Hamas in the belief that he can then manage the opposition Hamas presents Israel and tell the rest of the world, who are we to talk to? There's no one to talk to. And this was really done as a way of undermining the two-nation solution. How much of the responsibility do his policies, his attitude to the Palestine problem, bear to blame for what's happened? How much of that blame falls squarely on the shoulders of the man who is your prime minister for having followed the wrong policy?
The prime minister for over years has, shall we say, waffled on the question of a two-state solution. He made a statement once at a university here called Ben Gurion, the Bar Ilan University, on the two-state solution, and then he shall we say, he repolished the statement in one way or another. Up to now, his present coalition, the government coalition, is the most extreme right coalition that has ever been in power in Israel. And his members of the parties who compose this coalition, two extreme parties, are the swing vote for his remaining in power, and they believe, and they are also representing the hundreds of thousands of Israelis who have settled in the West Bank since 1967. So he has his problems, his internal political problems of how to maintain power inside Israel and how to find a viable policy which will, on the one hand, be in line one way or another with the international opinion and so forth, with emphasis on the United States, of course, and emphasis in the United States of the administration. And on the other hand, how he can, what he can do in preserving his government in one way or another. I have never been a politician, and I never negotiated with political parties, and I don't welcome that task in any way these days. I'm too old for that, so I can't give you an answer on that.
But has he fallen between two stools, trying to maintain his own longevity as prime minister? And he's done that successfully. He's been the longest prime minister in your country's history, but failing to actually tackle the Palestine problem, failing to use the opportunities. And you described one so eloquently when you talked about the killing of Mashal, the response from King Hussein, the opportunity that could have opened. Has he fallen between two stools?
I cannot disagree with you. But as I said, what I've been trying to say is that in terms of the priorities in my thoughts, in my mind this morning, on this Friday lunchtime in Israel, I don't have a shall we say a viable plan to suggest to you or to the prime minister as to how to proceed here. There's an ideological problem here, and he will have to find the ultimate solution of bringing both his ideology and his policy, his practical policy, his possible policy, national policy, in line with each other. I'm not the one who to suggest how we can do it. I don't think he can do it. And it so happens that I'm also a member of a movement in this country which is urging him to resign.
My very last question, Mr. Halevy, I want to ask you your personal view of the future. With some reportedly 750,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, do you really still believe a two-nation solution is feasible? And I'll tell you why I ask, because there are people like Gideon Levy, one of your country's most respected, internationally most renowned columnists, who's gone on record, both in his columns but also in interviews to me, where he said a one-nation solution is the only answer for Israel, a one-nation solution where Israelis and Palestinians, Jews and Arabs have equal rights as equal citizens in one country. Between those two views, which one do you personally incline towards?
I know Gideon Levy, not personally, I've never met him, but I've been following his views for many years. I disagree with him on everything he says, and I don't believe that he was at one time the secretary to Mr. Shimon Peres, who was the head of the Labour Party, which was the leading party here for over 30 years. But his views are very, very extreme in terms of the Palestinian issue. He's been writing daily in one of the Israeli leading newspapers, Haaretz, it's called, and expounding his views. I don't agree with him. I think this is not a one-state solution, is not, in my view, a solution is a viable way of bringing peace to the Middle East.
I thank you, Mr. Halevy, for the time you've given me, for the openness, fullness, candor with which you've discussed the questions I've asked you, and for many of the things that you've said, where, as you yourself commented, you might have spoken perhaps a bit more than you should, but I thank you for that as well. You've opened the eyes of my countrymen to issues on which they had only the vaguest of ideas. And what you brought home is the extent to which this problem will be very difficult to resolve, if at all. As you said, the intention to annihilate is unachievable. And yet Israel needs a solution that ensures you don't get attacked like this again. But between annihilating and finding the solution, there are many options. One of those will have to work, but no one knows which. Thank you very much indeed for the time you've given me.
Thank you, and I wish you well.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Take care. Stay safe.
You too. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.